Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please be sure to leave this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today, I know this video is a little bit later than intended, but as always, life sometimes gets in the way. It is still here nonetheless, and that is my last video for list season before we move into reviews proper, and that is the top 15 best movies of 2024. Now, in talking about movies, I did talk about my worst movies a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned that there were definitely some weaker moments in this year, but I do think the strong moments shined really brightly this year as well. I do think that this was another overall really good year for movies. Not quite as good as last year. Last year had a pretty incredible batch, but this year still more than holds its own in my opinion, with some truly great films that can be admired and enjoyed. And yeah, there's gonna be a lot to talk about here, so I don't want to waste too much more time. Just keep in mind that this list is just my opinion, and that these are my personal thoughts on these. If you have movies that you liked better than this, or that you thought maybe were not present on this list, then please let me know in the comments what your favorite movies of 2024 were after you're finished watching this video. But yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's get started with the top 15 best movies of 2024, starting off with, of course, number 15. At number 15 is one of the more pleasantly surprising movies of the year. I didn't even necessarily expect this one to rank so high, but I think it just really worked for me all around as both a very funny and a very heartfelt movie, and that is Thelma, about an elderly woman named Thelma, played by June Squibb, who did pass away this year, and she gets caught in an insurance scam and gets money taken from her, and essentially the movie is the journey of her going to retrieve this money back, along with trying to prove her family wrong and that she doesn't need to go to a nursing home and that she can still live independently on her own, since it's based on the director's own relationship with his own grandmother, which I think adds another dimension to the movie that makes it work even better. Not to mention that this movie is just absolutely hilarious. Easily one of the funniest movies I saw this year in terms of how well it plays its comedy. It is basically being a parody of a Mission Impossible action story in places, but of course all the action is taking place with elderly people, so there's a lot of funny little twists played with that I think work really well. I think it also helps that we just have some simply great performances in this movie from front to back. June Squibb is superb as Thelma. She plays this character very well. You find yourself really caring for her. I think she really embodies that performance very well, and I think she plays it in a very believable way. I also found Fred Hechinger good as Daniel, basically playing the director Josh Margolin's role, and I really liked the relationship between him and his grandmother. It felt so genuine, and I think the movie did a really good job of making you feel like this could be your grandmother. Probably my favorite performance, if I had to choose one, would be Richard Roundtree as Ben. He was excellent in this, and the sort of odd couple relationship he has with Thelma is very fun to watch, I think. I really like how the two work off of each other, and their comedy is just a joke a minute. Overall, this is just a very pleasant movie from front to back. Not much here to complain about at all. I just found this to be one of the most enjoyable movie watching experiences I had all year. And if you haven't seen it, because I do think this movie went a little bit underrated, then I would recommend you check it out. At number 14 is Love Lies Bleeding, a movie that just feels like the perfect sort of crime thriller and love story combination. that you don't get to see too often. It really works well in terms of the genre it's going for, and it is so confident at it. What I really like about this movie is that it really just pushes you into the atmosphere of it so naturally. Everything in this movie feels realistically gritty and just intense, and you can definitely feel that there is tension at almost any point in this movie in terms of what is going on. And it really does help that our main characters are very intriguing. We've got our main character Lou, played by Kristen Stewart, who, sort of like Robert Pattinson, is an actress who I think is unfairly defined by one performance and has actually proven herself to be a much better performer after that. But she is great here as Lou, this person who heads up a gym, but also has a dark past with her criminal family, headed up by her father, Lou Sr., played also very well by Ed Harris. I mean, Ed Harris is absolutely menacing here. The way he plays his character is very eerie and otherworldly. I think actually the highlight of this movie comes across in more of a slight newcomer in Katie O'Brien as Jackie, who sort of forms a relationship with Kristen Stewart's character Lou. She's a very ambitious bodybuilder, and the directions they take her character as she continues to be pushed into this criminal world that her girlfriend's father heads up is interesting to watch. And then the movie takes even more unexpected steps in terms of how it's visually presenting this love story that really, I think, actually worked to the movie's advantage. It makes it a very unique experience that I thought was very cool to watch. This movie, I mean, from front to back, is a very compelling experience. I thought it was a very fun watch, and I was endlessly intrigued by what was going on in it. It definitely was another movie that sort of jumped out at me and sort of surprised me, but I would say in the best way possible. At number 13 is one of the more controversial movies of this year, you could definitely say, and that is Civil War. Now, this movie's title may be a little bit deceiving because this movie isn't really about the war that is going on in the movie, a war between different factions of America. Instead, it focuses on the world of these journalists who are documenting the war that is going on, and a sort of running commentary of how far you'll go to get the perfect shot and what that can do for your mental psyche and your mental state. It's definitely not what I was expecting going into the movie, but I think if you open your mind up to what the movie is trying to say or trying to talk about, then I think you will actually get a pretty good experience. This movie does do a good job of setting up the world as one in which you do not want to be there because of all the violence and destruction that is going on. It definitely takes you into the mindset of a war-torn America and serves as a sort of cautionary tale about that. And I think it does work from the perspective of the journalists because they get to see all this horrible stuff happening, but we also get to see their different perspectives on it. Like our main character, Lee, played by Kirsten Dunst, is seemingly okay with everything that's going on, seemingly numb to it, you could almost say, as she has been a journalist for years and is very experienced at it. And she seems to just want to go in, get the picture, and get out. But her character journey becomes very intriguing as she has some old trauma awakened around her in terms of what she's had to go through in the past as a journalist. And I think as that trauma unfolds, the story continues to become more compelling. And while I do call her the main character, I actually think more of the story is from the perspective of Kaylee Spade's character Jessie, which is fitting because Jessie is new to the journalism industry. Basically, she falls under the wings of Lee, and Lee teaches her, but as the movie progresses, Lee comes to the realization that maybe she needs to get Jessie out of this business before it is too late and before she becomes like her, just desensitized to violence, desensitized to war, and just only looking for the perfect shot because that's all she cares about. And the movie doesn't necessarily go the way you expect it will in terms of how it develops that story. The performances across the board in this movie are really well done. I think Kirsten Dunst plays Lee very well. Definitely a pretty different turn for her in terms of playing a much more quiet and restrained character than she might normally. And I think she really plays this part well in terms of delivering the trauma that the character is going through. And I think Kaylee Spaney is great as Jessie. This is personally my favorite performance of her this year, and I really do think she had a breakout year this year in between this and Alien Romulus. Stephen Henderson was very interesting as Sammy, the most experienced journalist out of all of them, and it was interesting to see him basically having a very opposite perspective on it compared to the rest of the characters. Well done and well integrated into the movie. And then we have Jesse Plemons playing a character who's only in the movie for about 5 to 10 minutes, but he gives one of the most memorable performances of the year, which just speaks to the utter talent of this actor and what he can do when you put him on the screen. He is just incredible here, very intimidating, and his scene is easily one of the most memorable parts of the year, of the movie year in 2024, I would say. I really think this movie deserved maybe a little less controversy because I do think what it's doing, it is doing very well. At number 12 is the religious thriller Conclave, which is one of the bigger Oscar contenders this year, and I would say for good reason. I really found this movie to be very intriguing in terms of how it built up its thrilling premise of this a papal election going on and this new pope being appointed and all the different perspectives that people have in the story on Catholicism and who should be the new religious leader. Is it going to be the more liberal pope, the more conservative one, or something in between, or maybe even something a little more unexpected? It's also a sort of meditation on faith and on having doubt in your religion, mainly shown through Ralph Fiennes' character, Father Lawrence, who is having a crisis of faith and isn't sure if he even wants to be in the position he's in anymore. But at the same time, when he gets a little taste for power in the movie and realizes that he could be in the running for being the Pope, he is not necessarily hesitant to grab at that power. It's all really interestingly played out and creates a very dramatic just sort of centerpiece for the movie that I think works well. In a way, I think this becomes one of the best faith-based movies I've ever seen because it asks those honest questions. This is better than a lot of explicitly Christian movies directed by Christians who ask these questions because this movie, unlike some of those, isn't afraid to tackle with the legitimate doubt and isn't afraid to have conversations about it, philosophical conversations that I think really bring this movie up to another level. I mean, it also helps that everyone is absolutely on their A game here in terms of the performances that they are delivering. Ralph Fiennes gives one of my favorites of the year as Ralph Lawrence. He is just so endlessly intriguing here, especially in him dealing with his faith crisis. Stanley Tucci is in danger of going severely underrated here as Bellini. I just loved his performance and found him interesting in terms of him showing maybe a little bit of the hypocrisy of the liberal side of the Catholic faith and how that can be its own form of danger as well. And then John Lithgow playing a believably despicable, more hardline right-leaning Pope and Father Tremblay that I found to be very interesting. But the person who comes out on top, maybe here, besides Ralph Fiennes, who I do think gives the best performance, is Carlos Diaz as Father Benitez. I mean, his performance is so nuanced and so powerful, and I just really felt compelled by him anytime he was on screen. I do like the score in the movie as well. I think the music does a good job at bringing the thrills to this movie and making it feel big and feel very political. I just found this to be very fascinating and a very fun watch with just so many great performances and beautiful cinematography dominating it throughout. At At number 11 is Monkey Man, perhaps one of the best action movies of the year, and it is carried hard by Dev Patel's just incredible performance. He plays this character with so much grit and determination, and you just can't help but root for him in terms of his desires to go at the elite in the world he's living in. And it is the fact that it is inspired by a real-life legend is also very interesting and adds a really cool layer to the movie. I don't really have much to say about this movie because it's pretty simple what makes it work. It is a very well choreographed action movie with a sympathetic character at the center who you really do care about, and the journey he goes on. We sort of see Dev Patel's character named Kid going on this journey of trying to find inner peace, but struggling to do so even after he's taking all these people down who undeniably deserve what's coming to them. But then the movie takes a twist in the second half that I think really works to the movie's favor and takes it in a direction that makes it all the more powerful, I think. It's a really beautiful way the movie takes the thematic arc, and I think it works. This movie looks just gritty and just grimy, and it works well for what the idea of the movie is pushing forward in terms of this very just angry revenge arc that the character goes on. The fights are well done and well choreographed and feel big, but also feel realistic. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say about this movie besides it is just such a great time, and I would absolutely recommend you check it out if you have not done so. And now we get into our top 10, and man, these movies were not necessarily the easiest to rank, and there's still some where I feel like they could switch around at any given moment, but for the purposes of this list, this is where they're going to land. And at number 10 is one of the more recent movies from last year, one of the last movies that came out in 2024, and that is Nosferatu. And yeah, Robert Eggers is, 4 for 4 now. It is absolutely impressive what he has managed to accomplish in terms of his directorial journey. I do think that this is maybe Robert Eggers' most complete feeling movie. It feels like his most well realized and pretty much includes everything that he's wanted to do as a director, culminating in a much bigger budget that I think works well for him. And right off the bat, what I have to talk about this movie is just the cinematography. Wow, this is one of the most gorgeous looking movies I have seen this year. I love that it sort of pays tribute to the black and white aesthetics of the original in terms of some of the shots that it has. There are so many shots in this movie where I just sat back in disbelief in terms of how well just made they were and how well composed they were. They just look absolutely incredible, and I think it's hard to deny that this is one of the most beautiful looking movies of 2024. You just feel like you are transported to a different world. It is a really well done period piece in terms of how it looks, the believable costumes, the accents, everything like that. Along with that, there's the great performances. I'm glad after coming off of the very bad TV show The Idol, Lily Rose Depp was able to prove herself in a great performance here as Ellen Hutter, an endlessly sympathetic character who you feel what she's going through in terms of her conflicted desires. And yes, this is a movie very much so about desire, and I think it's hard to deny that there is a part of her that desires Nosferatu and what he means. I found her performance to be very compelling, and I think she does a good job at naturally transforming from the more just sympathetic character to one who can be pretty creepy in places as well. But really, who comes out on top in this movie, and he just sort of shows himself in a very subtle way, is Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter, Ellen's husband. He is just awesome in this movie. He gives such a great performance, and I was endlessly interested by his journey. Willem Dafoe is a natural here as a professor. He feels perfect for this world in terms of the accent that he is giving, in terms of the performance he's giving as this very just out there person, and it works well for what the movie's doing. And in terms of some characters being a little bit skeptical of him. I think it works that he's playing this very out there character. But of course, we can't talk about this movie without talking about the man himself, Nosferatu, played just so well by Bill Skarsgård. Skarsgård, I mean, all the Skarsgårds gives great performances, but Bill might be my favorite out of them. He is just so great in this role. He is intimidating. His accent is so unique, and it just feels like he disappears into the role. It is perfectly done, and I mean, you just feel the menace coming from this character and just the eeriness. But also, you sort of see the allure of him in some ways, and it's interesting to see that balance played out in his character. This movie, I mean, it's just another banger from Robert Eggers, and yeah, I'm just going to continue to have my eyes on what this guy continues to do because this is another incredible entry from him. At number 9 is another great action movie. This was one of the better year for action movies, in my opinion, and that is Rebel Ridge. And I think what I really like about this movie is how just sort of grounded it feels. It's definitely trying to fall in the lane of recent action thrillers like John Wick, for an example, where it has a character who could single-handedly take down a lot of people and who definitely has a side of them that is obviously like, you don't want to mess with them, but this movie plays it maybe a little less exaggerated than John Wick does by putting it in a more realistic small town setting with this corrupt police force that our main character is trying to face off against. Terry Richmond played just very well by Aaron Pierre, who gives just a great performance here. What I really do find interesting about this movie is that unlike a lot of action thrillers out there, our main character actually goes out of his way and is very intentional about taking people out in a non-lethal fashion. He doesn't kill anyone in this movie, actually. I think his overall arc is very sympathetic in terms of him just wanting to simply bail out his cousin who was wrongfully imprisoned. And this is his just goal moving forward in the movie, very sympathetically. But as he sort of uncovers the secrets behind this corrupt police force, his goal changes a little bit and he starts to care about this town that is being oppressed by this very corrupt group of officers. I think that it was also cool to see Anna Sophia Robb back in a movie. I haven't seen her in stuff in a long time, and she's great here as this sort of journalist Summer McBride who has her own motivations for why she's wanting to take down this police force, and the relationship that the two main characters form is well done and well established, I think. This movie, I mean, it's really well paced. It feels natural in the way it builds up things. The action is exciting. The characters you hate are played despicably well, especially Don Johnson's Chief Sandy. This movie is just really well done in terms of the action, in terms of the performances. I mean, it's the whole package, really, and I think it's one that you should definitely check out if you haven't done so. Next up at number 8 is what I might debate is the movie that got me the most on a scary level, at least, and that is The First Omen. And I didn't expect this one to scare me as much as it did, because while I do like the original Omen, I don't find it to be one of the more frightening movies out there. But this one, man, I mean, this one really does bring the scares and deliver them very well. And it just really ingrains you into that scary atmosphere throughout its runtime. I also think it actually works really well as a prequel to The Omen. This movie feels like it has a purpose for being here, and it feels like it has had a reason for being made. And I think it connects very naturally to the original Omen movie. It doesn't do too much fan service, and the stuff that is fan service feels cleverly implemented, I think. I mean, it helps that we have so many great performances here. Nell Tiger-Free gives a breakout excellent performance as Margaret, maybe my favorite final girl in a movie this year. She was excellent in this movie. She really delivered, and I think her journey is one that is endlessly sympathetic to watch, and I really was rooting for her to get out. It's really felt like a performance that will be remembered in the horror lexicon for many years to come, just because of how memorable she was. Ralph Ineson is great as Father Brennan. I mean, he's always so fun to watch, and I think that is no less true here. And then we've got Maria Caballero, who gives a frightening performance as Luz. I mean, man, talk about something that's not going to leave your mind for a long time. Has such a memorable scene in this movie that really just sends chills up the spine. It works very well. And that also goes for Bill Nighy as Cardinal Lawrence. He is very menacing here, and even though he's not in the movie that much, you still don't forget what he brings to the table. This movie, I mean, it's a very well done piece of horror. It is just eerily frightening, and even if there's a lot of stuff on screen that happens that is implied, you still feel the just utter terror of that implication, and it's like the implication is actually scarier than what you can see, which is a rule of horror that some horror creators don't seem to understand, but this movie certainly does. And it just feels visceral and just really gets under your skin. I think this movie is deserving recognition as one of the better legacy horror movies out there that is built off an already existing product, because it stands on its own, and you don't even necessarily need to see the original to appreciate what this one has to offer, which I think is a nice thing to see because it is such a rarity. At number 7 is another sort of prequel, but this time on a different end of the genre in terms of it being an action epic, and that is Furiosa, which is the prequel to the Mad Max movie Fury Road, both directed by George Miller. And I'll admit, when I saw the trailers for this movie, I was a little bit concerned about this one. This movie more than proved me wrong, and obviously so because of how high it's ranking on this list. But, I mean, yeah, while it's not as good as Fury Road, and it would be hard for a lot of action movies to be as good as Fury Road, because Fury Road is one of the best action movies of all time, this movie still stands well enough in its own right, and stands tall as one of the better revenge action movies I've seen, because in the movie, the character actually gets her revenge, and she gets it in a way that is satisfying while not making her character seem just as bad as the characters that she is saying are worse than her. The way she gets her revenge as well is pretty creative, I have to say. I'm not going to reveal how she gets her revenge exactly and how she takes Dementus down for killing her mother, but the way it happens is thematically fitting and just feels very appropriate. The movie is such a fun watch, and I think it unfolds its story very well. It feels almost perfectly paced, I would say. Well, like I said, there's not anything quite as great as some of the most iconic scenes in Fury Road. There are still some really good action set pieces this year that mark as some of the best that 2024 had to offer. Add on top of that some truly great performances, and you've got a just great movie to watch. Anya Taylor-Joy's Furiosa is mainly a quiet performance. She doesn't really talk that much, but what she delivers in her emotions and her body movement is well done and proves Anya Taylor-Joy as one of the best newer actresses working right now. Chris Hemsworth, I mean, Marvel did him so dirty with the later portrayals he had of Thor. I think they sort of ruined Thor's character in some ways, so it was nice to see him playing a character that he could really sink his teeth into, who had some deep nuances to him in Dementus. There's more to Dementus than just being a cartoonish villain, which is what he seems to be at first, but as we unpeel the layers, there's a lot more going on with him than you might expect, and he is having such a fun time with this character. You can really tell. This is just proving that George Miller is great at directing action epics, and this one, it's no exception. At number 6 is a huge awards winner, and I think for good reason, and that is Anora. This is gotta be maybe one of the best character pieces from 2024 in terms of how it develops our main character Annie, also known as Honora. Sean Baker has a penchant for developing the lives of sex workers in a way that makes them feel very human and very real. It doesn't necessarily give a judgment on them either. It just presents them as they are, which I think works very well. I think Honora is no exception because we really do just get to see this character and the life that she has in a way that feels very realistic and just how she would be as working as a sex worker, but also showing that she has other things going on in her life too. And I think it's a very interesting story, a sort of Cinderella story in a way, and I think purposefully so. As Honora meets this person who is very rich, this very rich Russian named Ivan, and she sees in him the possibility to leave the life of being a sex worker behind and potentially get to earn more money and get to live all the things that she's dreamed about. But as Ivan and Annie continue to develop their relationship, Ivan does eventually propose to her and they get married in Vegas, and they've only known each other for about a week, keep in mind, so that's also adding up to this being sort of a more twisted Cinderella story. Then reality sets in as Ivan is son to a very powerful Russian elite who seems to be implied to be rather dangerous, maybe part of the Russian mob, it is implied as well. And they do not want Ivan to get married to an American and what's more to a sex worker. So they send some of their workers to retrieve Ivan and to have him and Annie annul their marriage. All the while Annie is doing this, she is going through complicated emotions about not really wanting to annul the marriage because she's seeing her dreams dissolve before her very eyes, and she's also forming this relationship with one of the people that was sent to retrieve Ivan named Igor, who seems to be the only person who can see her for who she truly is. I think it should not be denied that this movie is very funny. This is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. In the middle of its runtime, it turns into a sort of screwball comedy with all this physical comedy going on that is just so funny and works so well. All the while, it doesn't cheapen the emotion of the movie just because it does have the comedy in it. Actually, if anything, that makes the dramatic ending hit all the harder. I mean, there's so many just great performances of this year. Mikey Madison gives, I would have to say maybe one of my favorite performances of the year as Annie. Even if there are other movies that rank above this one, I do think she gave one of the best performances of the year without a doubt. One of the best actress performances, one of the best acting performances in general. I think Yura Borisov is great as Igor, and I think some people are a little bit dismissive of him getting an Oscar nod because his performance was a little more quiet, but I think he actually does a lot with his silent performance that makes him earning of that nomination. I think he does a lot subtly that works really well. This movie is just so naturally well done that you can almost forget that you're watching a fictional movie. All the people in this feel very real, and it feels like a very realistic story. I loved what I saw. I think it has one of the most memorable and haunting endings of the year, and yeah, I think it's deserving of all the recognition it's gotten. At number 5 is debatably the most hyped horror movie of the year, and I think deservedly so, and that is The Substance. I mean, wow, talk about an ambitious body horror movie that continues to push the envelope, and just when you think you can't push it further, the movie proves you wrong and brings it to an even more insane level. And yeah, the insanity in this movie is actually the most delightful thing about it. This movie tells you what it is from the start. It's not particularly subtle, it is very in your face about what it's about, but that is a stylistic charm of the movie, in my opinion. It is a very on-the-nose satire about Hollywood and about beauty standards for women in the Hollywood scene. And I think it works well in terms of how it delivers that commentary. I think it also helps that we just have two of the best horror performances you can see all year long, and Demi Moore as Elizabeth Sparkle, our main character, who is going through this struggle of not seeing herself as beautiful as she once used to be, and insecurity about her body image because of the standards that Hollywood has. So she takes this substance that brings out from her body a younger, more beautiful version of herself in the form of Sue, played excellently by Margaret Qualley, who I'm glad has gotten a lot of love this year, and if anything, deserves more because she is just great as Sue. And it's interesting because in the movie you see them as antagonizing forces, but then the movie reminds you that these two are the same person. And I think it's very interesting to watch the two of them sabotage each other, and how it serves as a sort of metaphor for how women in Hollywood will do things to sabotage themselves to make the beauty standards in Hollywood, to make themselves meet the beauty standards in Hollywood at least. And I mean, it works well from that point, and the commentary is biting and well done. And it's also sort of a commentary on self-hatred and hatred of yourself and your own body image. There's a scene in this movie that is not particularly horrific. There's no body horror going on, and yet it might be the most memorable moment and the most devastating moment of the movie. It's just Elizabeth Sparkle getting ready for a date, and she continues to see things wrong with herself. The soundtrack of this movie, I mean, my goodness, talk about an incredible soundtrack that really just brings the energy of the movie forward even more. And the body horror, I mean, wow, talk about some incredible effects with makeup and special effects. This movie is wild in terms of the body horror it goes for and how it pushes forward that. I think this movie, if it earns some awards at the Oscars, that would say a lot for the horror industry, and I think it'd be a great thing. So I am rooting for it pretty hard, I have to say. And the fact that it is one of my top 5 movies of the year certainly helps. At number 4 is a more symbolic horror film, but I think it does well in terms of the symbolism it is going for, and that is I Saw the TV Glow. This movie just sort of crept up on me out of nowhere. I wasn't necessarily expecting what I got out of it, but what I did get was something very powerful and very emotionally poignant, I think. This is a movie about the horror of identity and the horror of losing who you really are. And it's obviously meant to be a movie for an LGBT audience as well. I think people in that community are definitely going to attach onto this movie. The movie is very interesting in how it builds up its themes, especially as our main characters seem to be attached onto this TV show that they used to watch when they were children, but they start to realize that maybe they were characters in this TV show, or at least Bridget Lundy Payne's character, Maddie, realizes that they are actually characters in the TV show, her and main character Owen, played by Joseph Smith, and that they need to go back into the TV show before it's too late, or they'll lose who they really are. And, I mean, talk about a absolutely haunting ending that has stuck with me all year long. The way Owen screams in the ending and the way he just realizes he's trapped is so devastatingly executed. It just proves that Joseph Smith is an actor to keep your eyes on, which is something that I'm sort of surprised to have myself saying, because I've not necessarily been the biggest fan of him as an actor in the past, but he is, I mean, he delivers an awesome performance here, just really well done. Visually, this movie is gorgeous to look at. It is very confident in the visual cinematography it is going for and the beautiful color scheme that it has. The soundtrack is very 90s inspired, which definitely brings about a lot of nostalgia in the movie. This is, I mean, a very powerfully done movie, and I think one that deserves, if anything, more recognition, and I think shows that Jane Schoenberg is a director with endless potential, and I can't wait to see what she does after this, because this is just excellent. At number 3 is a movie that some have said is a little overrated this year in terms of horror, but I simply have to disagree. I think this is excellent. And that is Longlegs, directed by Osgood Perkins. I think Osgood Perkins has always been great at delivering atmosphere, but this is his best version of that yet. if there is a movie that is definitive atmospheric horror this year, then Longlegs is that movie. You always feel as Detective Harker is uncovering this mystery of Longlegs and what his motivations are, that there is something even darker going on under the surface than what the darkness that's already present. And as the mystery unfolds, it just becomes more foreboding. I loved the investigation aspect of this movie. It was so interesting, and the way they unfolded the mystery was very intriguing. And then the movie taking an unexpected turn and going much more supernatural in the second half in terms of what was going on wasn't unexpected, but a delightful surprise in my opinion that only added to the foreboding nature of the movie. Micah Monroe is one of the best horror final girls out there. I mean, she was great in It Follows, and she might even be better here. She is great as Agent Lee Harker, and it's interesting how her journey goes in terms of her developing her emotions, as she starts the movie as fairly monotoned and emotionless, but as the movie goes on, she becomes more and more attached with her emotions as she realizes what's going on. On the other hand, Longlegs is on the opposite end of the spectrum as a highly emotional and volatile character, played very well by Nicolas Cage. Osgood lets Nicolas Cage do his thing, and it is wild to watch. He is an insane character, but also very menacing, and you just feel the foreboding aura coming from him. It is very well done and very eerie to see. And yeah, like I said, this movie is excellent in its atmosphere. The visuals in this movie, it looks beautiful, but also beautifully terrifying. This could end up being one of my favorite horror movies, period. It is just so well done and so well executed, and I think is deserving of the hype it got. I think this movie got hype for a reason, and I can't help but love it. At number 2 is one of the most enthralling movies I saw this year in terms of the character dynamics, and that is Challengers. Shame on the Oscars for not recognizing Luca Guadagnino as at all, really. Zendaya is great in this as Tashi Duncan. You totally understand her motivations as the movie develops, and I like that the movie sort of takes its time with revealing those motivations as well, as we go through different time periods of these three characters' lives, and you get to see where they were at when they were younger in college versus where they're at as they grow older into adults. We got Josh O'Connor as Patrick Zweig, who is just so much fun in this movie. He just sort of loves to play the bad guy, it seems like. And I think that's very fun because he's not necessarily a typical antagonist in the movie. He is shifting from being the antagonist to being on the other two characters' side consistently, and it's interesting to see that relationship always shifting. And Mike Faist, I think he's in danger of going underrated here as Art Donaldson. He is great in this movie, and in my opinion has the most sympathetic stuff going on. But what really does bring these characters together, as I've said, is their very tumultuous relationships. It always feels like two of them are either against each other or for each other, or all three are against each other at sometimes. And it plays like a game of tennis, which is very clever. The movie is about tennis, but it's also not about tennis. It's also about characters who can never seem to be aligned with each other for one reason or another, but the movie tells you again and again that they should be together because they all bring something to the table for each other. And it shows Tashi to be the most clever out of all the main characters in terms of the plan going exactly the way she wanted it to. I just love how it unfolded. And the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is superb, one of the most engaging and fist-pumping scores of the year. And speaking of the tennis games, I mean, for a guy that says he doesn't like tennis, he sure made it look like one of the most fun games out there. And as someone who does like playing tennis, I think that helped me like the movie even more, especially in how uniquely it was filmed in the final match. This movie, all its elements just add up together to make a nearly flawless watching experience where I just loved following the character dynamics and the game itself. All of it is just such a fun time. Now, before we go off into my number one pick, I did want to list off a couple of honorable mentions, and I actually have quite a few to mention here, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. I'm just going to give a brief little snippet about why I liked each of them, and then we'll move on to my number one. So my first honorable mention is Hundreds of Beavers. This movie is so unique and so fun. It feels like a live-action Looney Tunes, and I think purposefully so. A lot of the film is silent, and there's not much dialogue going on in it, but there's a joke a minute. Next up is one of the most pleasant surprises of the year, and that is Wicked. Specifically Part 1. Part 2 is going to be coming out this year, I believe, but this is one of the better musical movie adaptations I've seen. It actually does very well with the musical numbers. I personally think that Cynthia Erivo might give the best version of Defying Gravity that I've seen, which is really saying something. And Ariana Grande gives a surprisingly really good performance as Glinda. Honorable mention number 3 is A Different Man. Sebastian Stan is proving himself to be one of the most interesting post-Marvel stars. He is great in this movie. And this movie is sort of similar to The Substance plot-wise, but I think it pushes itself forward enough to be its own unique thing. And I think that this movie's message is really well done and really poignant, especially in talking about disabilities. Honorable mention number 4 is Caddo Lake, a sort of time travel movie with some interesting twists and turns going on in it. Dylan O'Brien is great in this, and I really found the central plotline to be very interesting, and all the different twists of how the timeline works actually makes this movie a pretty cool mystery. Honorable mention number 5 is Dee Dee, which feels like a very well-realized version of a movie about a middle schooler who is going through the angst of being a teenager and also the experience of being Asian American. It works very well and has some very engaging performances. Honorable mention number 6 is Strange Darling. I think if you're looking for a horror movie that will constantly test your expectations and make you unsure of what you're going to see next, then you're going to get that out of this movie for sure. And the way it plays with your expectations adds very cleverly to the thematic arc the movie's going on. Honorable mention number 7 is The Wild Robot, one of the best animated movies of the year easily, if not the best. I loved the visuals of this movie. DreamWorks just continues to prove themselves in terms of the animation that they do, and I loved the story in this. It was simple but very well implemented. Honorable mention number 8 is Alien Romulus. I think this was a good legacy sequel for the Alien movies, and while some of the fan service might be a little cheesy, it does work in my opinion, and once again, Kaylee Spaney is great in this. Honorable mention number 9 is Red Rooms. This movie is very subtly scary. It creeps up on you in terms of what it's doing with talking about the dark web, but it really does work, and the main character in this movie is very interesting. And last honorable mention is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. While I don't like this one necessarily as much as the proper trilogy, I do think it's still very well done, and once again, a visual treat. And now we move on to my number 1 movie of the year, and what topped the list for me? Well, yeah, nothing else was going to make number 1 this year than Dune Part 2. This one has been at the top spot ever since I saw it in March, and nothing ever beat it. I think this is one of the best sci-fi epics that has come out in recent memory. It's just so nice that we have someone like Denis Villeneuve around to do movies like this, because you just don't get movies like this all the time. It feels like a natural continuation of where the first Dune started off, and it's even better, I think. I think a lot of people have compared this movie to The Empire Strikes Back, and I actually think that's a pretty fitting comparison. This expands the world in an even bigger way, and it can make the movie pretty complex. I admit it did take me more than one watch to understand what was going on in this movie because of all the lore and all the different characters that are having their stories being told here, but the movie is fascinating from that perspective. Visually, it is just beautiful from front to back. The way the desert is filmed is mind-blowingly great. The planet that Feyd-Rautha lives on is one of the best visual moments of the year in terms of how they utilize the stark black and white. You can tell the foreboding energy that it has in terms of Paul Atreides coming into power and how that shouldn't really be happening. The movie makes it clear to the audience time and time again that this is not something you should be rooting for, that Paul coming into power will mean something bad is going to happen. Timothée Chalamet gives a great performance here. He is alternately sympathetic and terrifying as his character arc goes on. Very interesting to watch. I'm very interested to see where they take him in Dune Messiah. Zendaya continues to be great as Chani, I think, providing an interesting counterpoint to Paul's character, and their relationship continues to surprise. Rebecca Ferguson is the best here as Jessica. She is terrifying in this movie, a great antagonistic force that alternately becomes an ally for Paul in probably the worst way possible. She is just a menace here and brings across some of the messages about the idea of how much religion should influence politics. Javier Bardem is great as Stilgar, bringing some great comedy to this that I was not expecting but works well. Austin Butler just disappears into Feyd-Rautha, maybe one of the best character actors we have right now in terms of how he just disappears into different characters and so effortlessly embodies them. Florence Pugh has a bit of a smaller role here as Princess Irulan, but nevertheless doesn't fail to be memorable. I mean, there's just so much to love about this movie. There's so much I could talk about for days with it in terms of how it develops the plot, the thematic arc of just sort of inverting the hero's journey and making it one that you don't want to see happen. It's all very interestingly executed and adds up to a piece that is, I think, pretty much pitch perfect. This continues to prove that Denis Villeneuve is one of the best directors around, and I think I can officially say now that he is my favorite director. For the longest time, I would say Christopher Nolan took that spot, but Denis Villeneuve's filmography is undeniable, and I think he is my favorite at this point. And yeah, this is one of his best movies he's made. So yeah, that ends this list of my top 15 best movies of 2024. What were your favorite movies of 2024? Please let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please like this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.